I live in a quiet town in Pennsylvania, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and you rarely lock your doors. I just moved back into my childhood home after my dad passed away. It was meant to be temporary. While I figured things out, the house was old but solid. The kind of place where thunderstorms felt more intense than anywhere else. Maybe it was the creaky wood, or maybe it was what happened that night. It was early spring when the first big storm rolled in. Heavy rain, low rumbles of thunder. I was lying in bed around midnight, scrolling on my phone, the dim glow lighting up the room. That's when the power went out. Total silence, except for the sound of rain hitting the roof. I sighed, got up and grabbed a flashlight. I walked through the hallway toward the kitchen to grab some candles. That's when I noticed something strange. The back door was slightly open. Now, I know I shut earlier. Locked it, even. It sticks sometimes, so I always double check. But now it was open just a crack. The wind caused it to creak back and forth. I stared at it for a second before walking over and shutting it tight. I locked it again, even shoved a chair under the handle. The hairs on my neck were standing up. Something felt wrong. I went back to my room, trying to shake the feeling, blaming it on the storm. I lit a candle, crawled into bed, and closed my eyes. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Not outside, inside the house. Slow, deliberate, like someone was walking barefoot on old wood. I held my breath. The sound came from the hallway, then stopped. My door was closed, but I swear I heard someone breathing just on the other side. And then the doorknob turned. Not quickly, just a slow, steady twist. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I'd pass out. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The knob stopped turning. Dead silence. I sat there, gripping the edge of my bed, breathing hard, trying to stay calm. I was about to call the cops when I heard a voice, just above a whisper, from the hallway. It said, "I used to sleep in this room." I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't think. It wasn't my dad's voice. It wasn't anyone I recognized. And it sounded off, like it wasn't coming from a person, but from behind a wall. Suddenly, I remembered something. When I was a kid, I had recurring nightmares about a man who would stand at the foot of my bed. I never saw his face. He'd just stand there, watching. My dad used to tell me it was just dreams. But that night in that thunderstorm, it felt real. I eventually worked up the courage to swing the door open with my flashlight. Nothing was there, just an empty hallway, flickering shadows, and the soft patter of rain outside. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I checked every door and window. All were locked, except one, the basement door. It was wide open. I hadn't been down there in years. The stairs creaked as I went down slowly. The air felt heavy, damp and cold. Cobwebs covered the ceiling. I panned the flashlight around, and then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. In the corner of the basement, written on the concrete wall in charcoal, like a child had drawn it, were the words, "He still sleeps here." And beneath it was a crude drawing of a man. No face, just a tall figure with empty eyes, standing at the foot of a bed. My bed. I sold the house 3 months later. Never looked back. But sometimes when it storms and I'm lying in bed, I still dream about that doorknob turning. After I sold the house, I thought I could forget about that night. I moved to a small apartment in the city. New place, new start. But the thing about trauma is, it doesn't care about location. I had nightmares almost every week. Same dream every time. I'd wake up in my old room, thunder rumbling, and the man would be standing there closer than before, watching, breathing, always watching. I went to therapy, tried sleeping pills, even had a priest bless me once. Nothing helped. Every time it rained, I'd feel it again, that cold breath at the back of my neck, like something had followed me. But it wasn't until last month that I knew for sure. There was a thunderstorm forecast that night, the worst of the season. I was already anxious, pacing around, checking the locks. It was around 11:30 p.m. when the power cut out. Classic. I lit some candles and sat on the couch with a blanket, trying to ignore the wind howling outside. Then, I heard something that nearly made me drop the candle. 3 slow knocks on my front door. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body locked up with fear. The knocks came again. This time, harder, slower. I crept toward the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I stood there for a second, breathing heavily. Then I heard it. Knocks. From the back door. I ran to the kitchen. Again, nothing. But when I turned around, I froze. There were wet footprints on my living room floor, coming from my bedroom. I couldn't breathe, couldn't even scream. I picked up the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a flashlight, and tiptoed toward the hallway. My bedroom door was open. The candlelight flickered inside. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. There was a shape in my bed. Someone was lying in it. I raised the flashlight slowly, hand trembling. But before I could turn it on, thunder cracked, loud like it split the sky, and the lights flickered for a second. And that's when I saw him, the same man from my dreams. No face, standing at the foot of my bed. Again, but this time, he wasn't watching. He turned to look at me. I don't know how, but even without a face, I knew he was smiling. He raised one long, pale arm and pointed to the wall beside my bed. There was something written there, in dripping black letters. It said, "You left the house, but you took me with you." And then he was gone, just like that. I moved again the next morning, out of state, no forwarding address. I deleted all my social media, changed my number, everything. I haven't told anyone this story, until now. It's been quiet for a while. But tonight, as I sit in this motel room, trying to forget, it's starting to rain, and my doorknob just turned. And story 2, the storm that followed me. I never used to be afraid of thunderstorms. In fact, I kind of liked them. The way the sky would darken, the wind would pick up, and the rumble of thunder rolled through the house. It always made me feel strangely calm. But that changed 3 years ago, when a storm nearly killed me, or worse. It was mid-June, and I was house-sitting for my aunt and uncle while they were away on a cruise. They lived in a remote area of upstate New York, surrounded by woods, with the nearest neighbor about a quarter-mile away. No cell service, no streetlights, just dense trees and long, winding gravel roads. I was 22 at the time, fresh out of college, and honestly just happy to have a quiet place to myself for a couple weeks. I had brought my laptop, some books, and figured I'd enjoy the solitude, maybe even get some writing done. The first week went smoothly. I settled into a routine, wake up late, eat breakfast on the porch, go for long walks in the woods, cook dinner, watch movies, and pass out with the windows open to cool summer breeze. But one night, everything changed. It started with a storm warning. I remember hearing the alert on the old radio in the kitchen while I was cooking dinner. Something about an unusual thunderstorm cell approaching from the west. Nothing I hadn't heard before. I shrugged it off, finished my pasta, and sat down to eat. By 9 p.m., the rain had started. It came hard and fast. Within minutes, the trees outside were bending under the wind. The lights flickered, and I grabbed a few candles just in case. The thunder wasn't the distant, gentle rumble I was used to. It was sharp, cracks like gunfire that made the windows vibrate. Then came the lightning. It wasn't just the occasional flash. It was constant, flickering every few seconds like strobe lights, turning the house into a scene from a horror movie. Around 10:30, the power went out. I lit the candles and decided to just go to bed early. I figured the storm would pass by morning, and everything would be back to normal. But I was wrong. At 11:07 p.m., I heard a knock at the front door. Not a bang or a slam, just a knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps. I froze. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of nowhere during a thunderstorm at 11 at night? I didn't move. I just listened. The rain was still pounding on the roof. Thunder shook the floor beneath me. Then another knock. Knock, knock, knock. This time a little louder. I grabbed my phone, no signal. I held up the window, paced around. Still nothing. I didn't want to answer it, but I couldn't just ignore it either. Maybe someone's car had broken down. Maybe it was a hiker lost in the woods. So I crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. No one was there. I opened the door crack and looked around. Nothing. Just darkness, rain, and the wind whipping through the trees. I closed the door, locked it, and checked the back door too. Locked. I went upstairs and tried to go to sleep, convincing myself it was probably just a branch or something blown against the door. But at 12:12 a.m., it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. Same pattern. I jumped out of bed. I didn't check the door this time. I just stayed in the hallway, listening. Then I heard footsteps. Not heavy stomps, just movement, slow, deliberate creaks on the porch. Then a whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It was my name. Clear as day. Nathan. It came from outside, but it was too precise, too directed. Not shouted. Spoken. I ran to the guest bedroom and locked the door. My hand was shaking as I called 911. Still no signal. That's when I remembered something. My uncle had an old shotgun in the basement. I crept downstairs, feeling like I was in a movie I didn't want to be in. Thunder boomed over the house as I opened the basement door and descended into the pitch-black darkness with only a candle. I found the shotgun right where he kept it, on the rack by the boiler. But the second I turned around to go back upstairs, I heard a sound that froze me, a creak, coming from the top step. Someone was standing at the basement door. Nathan. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was loud, croaky, like it came from lungs filled with water. I blew out the candle to hide in the darkness and waited, gripping the shotgun with both hands. I held my breath, trying not to panic, but the door never opened. I waited there for what felt like hours. Eventually, silence returned, except for the storm still raging outside. At some point, I must have dozed off in the basement. When I woke up, daylight was coming through the tiny window. I crept back upstairs. No one was in the house, but the front door was wide open. I checked every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of a break-in. The only thing that was out of place was my name, scratched into the wood of the door. Deep, jagged letters. Nathan. I didn't stay another night. I packed my stuff and drove straight home, storm or not. When I got back to the city, I had 10 missed calls from my aunt and uncle. They said they'd been trying to reach me all night. There was never any storm warning on the news. They said the weather had been clear. When I told them what happened, they said no one had ever experienced anything like that in the house. But then my aunt said something that made my skin crawl. She asked, "Did you use the radio in the kitchen?" I said, "Yeah. The storm warning came from it." She went quiet for a second and then said, "Nathan, that radio hasn't worked in years." Next story, 3 The Last Cabin on Dry Creek Road. I used to think those creepy stories about people getting lost in the woods during a storm were just urban legends. Until it happened to me. What I experienced wasn't just fear. It was something deeper. A dread that sinks into your bones and never really leaves. This happened in late October of 2022. I had taken a solo weekend trip to the mountains, tried to escape the chaos of city life for a few days. I found a secluded Airbnb listing, a small log cabin near Dry Creek Road, about 30 minutes from the nearest town. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just trees and silence. Sounded perfect. I arrived on a Friday afternoon. The cabin was old but cozy, nestled right at the base of a mountain. There were thick woods in every direction, and the only way in or out was a narrow dirt road that twisted downhill through the trees. There was a handwritten note from the host on the kitchen counter. "Storms come fast out here. Don't stay out after dark. Keep the fire going if the wind picks up." That seemed odd, but I figured it was just local advice. Still, the phrasing stuck with me. Friday night passed uneventfully. I cooked, read for a while, and fell asleep listening to the wind outside. But on Saturday afternoon, the clouds rolled in. Thick, black, unnatural. By 5 p.m., the sky looked like it was midnight. Rain began falling in sheets, and the wind howled through the trees. Then came the thunder. not distant like usual, but impossibly close. Every boom rattled the dishes in the cabinets. At 6:47 p.m., the power went out. The whole cabin plunged into darkness. I grabbed my phone. No service. I had a flashlight and some candles. So I lit a few and sat by the fire, trying to stay calm. At exactly 7:12 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I froze. I hadn't seen a single car or person since I'd arrived. Who the hell would be out in a storm like this? Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. I waited. Then another knock. Louder, slower. I whispered, "Hello?" But there was no response. Just wind and thunder. I grabbed the flashlight and cautiously approached the door. There was no peephole, just a narrow side window. I tilted the flashlight and looked through it, and my stomach dropped. There was someone standing in the rain. No umbrella, no coat, just standing, soaked, head tilted upward, as if sniffing the air. I couldn't make out a face, only long, with hair clinging to their face and shoulders. They weren't knocking anymore, just waiting. I backed away from the door, heart racing. I didn't know whether to call out or hide. I decided to go upstairs and wait it out. I locked the bedroom door behind me, but the knocking didn't stop. It continued in waves. Knock, 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 then silence. Then again, louder, more desperate. At 8:05 p.m., it stopped. I peeked out the upstairs window. No one was there. I waited an hour, listening to every creak and gust of wind. Then the smell hit me, like wet soil and rot, something dead. I covered my nose and tried to ignore it, but it was getting stronger. I decided to go back downstairs. Maybe the fireplace was acting up. I descended the steps slowly. That's when I saw the muddy footprints. Bare feet, leading from the door into the kitchen. The door was still locked. I backed up the stairs as quietly as I could. I shut myself in the upstairs bathroom, turned off the flashlight, and waited. Then I heard it, a voice croaking from downstairs. It sounded like a woman, gurgling, wheezing like water in her lungs. She was saying something over and over again. "Let me in, let me in, let me in." But she was already inside. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the bathroom, door locked, armed with fireplace poker. I must have passed out sometime around dawn, because when I opened my eyes, the storm was gone. I went downstairs. The footprints were gone. The smell gone. The cabin was exactly as I had left it on Friday, like nothing had happened. I packed and left immediately. But here's the part that still haunts me. When I got home, I contacted the host. I told him what happened. The knocking, the footprints, the voice. There was a long pause before he responded. He said, "That cabin was the last one built on Dry Creek before the town stopped allowing construction. There used to be more, 5 or 6, but they all burned down after a landslide hit during a thunderstorm back in the 70s. Only one body was ever found, a woman who was staying there alone. The rest just vanished." Then he asked, "You didn't let her in, did you?" I didn't reply to the host's last message. I didn't know what to say. My hands were trembling and my throat was dry. I just closed the chat window and sat there in silence, replaying that one question in my mind. "You didn't let her in, did you?" I was sure I hadn't. The door was locked. I never opened it. But as I sat in my apartment that night, trying to calm myself, I noticed something. Mud. A thin line of muddy footprints leading from my front door into my living room. I live on the 3rd floor of a locked apartment building. No open windows. No sign of a break-in. Just footprints. And then as I stared, frozen in place, I heard it. A soft, wet whisper just behind me. "Thank you for letting me in." Next story 4. The Thunderstorm Horror. It was the kind of night you hear about in old ghost stories. The kind of night where the storm feels almost alive. It started with an unexpected chill that ran down my spine as the wind picked up a cold gust that swept through my apartment, rattling the windows. I was alone, a rare occurrence in itself. My roommates were out of town for the weekend, and I had the entire place to myself. I thought nothing of it at first. dismissing the chill as just another cold front moving in. But then the sky darkened and the wind began to howl. The first clap of thunder came out of nowhere, so loud it shook the walls. I wasn't afraid, but I could feel the tension in the air. Something was different tonight. The lights flickered once, then twice, before they went out completely. I groaned, already annoyed at the thought of fumbling around in the dark. I grabbed my phone from the table and turned on the flashlight. Outside, the storm was in full force. The rain hammered against the windows, and the sound of thunder was almost deafening. I sat down on the couch, trying to relax. But the longer the storm raged, the more uneasy I became. Something about the atmosphere felt off. It wasn't just the storm. It felt like the house itself was alive, breathing, watching. Then, just as I was about to call my roommates to see if they were experiencing the same strange weather, I heard something. It was faint at first, just a soft tapping sound on the window. I dismissed it, thinking it was just the rain, but it continued, growing louder with each tap. I stood up slowly, heart racing now. I walked to the window and peered outside. Nothing. I let out a sigh of relief and turned to walk back to the couch when I heard it again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was so distinct it sent a chill down my spine. I went to the window once more, but still there was nothing there, just the dark, stormy night. But that nagging feeling didn't go away. It was like something was watching me, waiting. I turned on the TV to drown out the unsettling silence. The news was on, talking about the storm and warnings about flash floods. But then the screen flickered. The image distorted, and a face appeared for just a second, pale, gaunt, and with eyes that were completely black. My heart nearly stopped. I quickly turned the TV off and looked around the room. The air felt thicker now, the walls almost pressing in. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. Of course. Typical. It was as though the storm itself had taken control of everything. A loud crash in the kitchen made me jump. My body tensed, and my legs carried me instinctively to the source of the noise. I found a glass bowl on the floor, shattered into pieces, the contents spilling out. I didn't remember knocking it over, but I didn't have time to think about that. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed to the apartment, slow and deliberate. I froze. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were right behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned around, expecting to see someone there. But no one was there. Then the tapping began again, but this time it was coming from the door. Tap, tap, tap. I stood there for a moment, paralyzed with fear. I had to know what was outside. But the thought of opening that door, I couldn't. The tapping grew more urgent, almost frantic. It was as though something or someone was trying to get in. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. But there was no logic, no explanation. Just the storm, the tapping, and the growing sense of dread. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, and held it like a weapon. Slowly, I approached the door, my hand shaking as I reached the knob. Before I could open it, the lights flickered again, and the power went out completely. I was plunged into darkness. The storm outside roared louder, the wind howling like a beast. And then, in the pitch black, I heard something I'll never forget, a whisper, low and guttural, as if coming from the very walls themselves. Let me in. The voice was distant, but unmistakably real. It sent a wave of terror through my body. I stumbled back, dropping the lamp. I couldn't breathe. I felt like the air itself was suffocating me. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here. But just as I was about to run for the door, the tapping stopped. And then the silence was even worse. It was so deep, so suffocating, that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The floorboards creaked behind me, followed by a soft, almost inaudible voice. I'm inside. I turned around, and in the corner of the room, standing perfectly still, was a figure, tall, shadowy, and with an unnaturally long arm stretched out toward me. Its fingers were too long, too thin, and they twitched with an unnatural rhythm. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My body betrayed me. locking me in place as the figure inched closer. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, but it felt like an eternity. The figure continued to move toward me, and I knew I had only moments before it reached me. Finally, I managed to stumble backward, my hands fumbling for the door. With all the strength I could muster, I threw open the door and ran into the storm, not caring about the rain, the wind, or the darkness that surrounded me. I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's house, banging on the door until they answered. They let me in, but when I looked back at my apartment, the lights were on, the windows were open, and the storm had subsided, but I could still hear the tapping. The aftermath. The police never found any evidence of an intruder, and no one could explain the strange events that night. My phone had no messages, no missed calls, nothing that could explain the eerie things I heard. The storm had passed, but the terror stayed with me, following me like a shadow. But the worst part? I still hear the tapping sometimes. Every time it rains, the sound returns, faint at first, then growing louder and louder. And if I listen closely, I can hear the whispers, too. Let me in. It's a warning, a promise. The storm isn't over, and it's only a matter of time before it comes back for me.